Okay, well, we're in this section of the book of Exodus where we're looking at Israel's rebellion against God and this incident of the golden calf. And we looked at chapter 32 last week, in which we saw how Moses had been up on the mountain, Mount Sinai, with God, communicating with God, God giving Moses the instructions concerning the tabernacle, and the people became impatient and were wondering what had happened to Moses. And so they went to Aaron and asked him to make for them some gods who would go before them. Regarding Moses, they say, we don't know what's become of him. And so Aaron instructed the people to take off their gold earrings, and from the gold he made for them this golden calf, and proclaimed to them, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And he built an altar, and the following day they had a feast, and they were worshipping the Lord. So it seemed to be a combination, or they were still worshipping the Lord, but also worshipping this golden calf as well. Meanwhile, up on the mountain, the Lord tells Moses what the people are doing, what's going on down below in the camp. And God instructs Moses to go down to them and tells Moses that they have corrupted themselves and turned aside quickly out of the way which God had commanded them to go, and they've made for themselves this molten calf. And the Lord says to Moses that they are a stiff-necked people, an obstinate people, and he tells Moses, leave me alone, that my wrath may burn against them, and that I may consume them. But he says of Moses, of you I will make a great nation. So God is saying, well, we'll finish with the Israelites, and it will be through you, through Moses, that we'll start this all over again. But Moses then intercedes, and he appeals to the Lord and asks the Lord to remember. Well, first of all, he suggests, well, if you go ahead and destroy the Israelites, then what will that do about your reputation amongst the Egyptians, who we've just left? And then Moses reminds the Lord of the promise that he had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, or Jacob, to give their descendants a land. So God would be breaking his promise in effect. And so the Lord then, we're told, repented of his intention to destroy the Israelites. So God changes his purpose, and he's no longer going to destroy them completely and make a fresh start again. And he would not do that. So Moses then comes down from the mountain with Joshua. Joshua's been on the mountain with him, and he's carrying with him the two tables of the testimony. And they hear the sound coming from the camp. Joshua thinks it's the sound of warfare, but Moses says it's the sound of singing. And when they get to the bottom of the mountain and they see what's going on, Moses' anger burned hot, we were told, and he threw the tables out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain, symbolizing that the covenant that God had made with the people has been broken. He took the golden calf, he burnt it and ground it up into powder, scattered it upon the water, and made the people of Israel drink it. And then he rebuked Aaron for Aaron's part in all of this. And Aaron's attitude, well, was really, well, we know this is what the people are like. I was just giving them what they wanted, and I just threw in this gold into the fire, and this calf happened to come out of the fire. Moses then challenged the people for them to declare who was on the Lord's side. And it was the Levites, the tribe of Levi, who came forward, and uh, the Levites armed themselves with swords and went through the camp, and 3,000 men were killed by the Levites. And as a result of that, Moses told them that they had ordained themselves for the service of the Lord. So the Levites would have a role later to play in the tabernacle and the functioning of the tabernacle because of their declaration that they were on the Lord's side on that occasion. Moses then intercedes again with the Lord on behalf of the people, and he tells the people that they have sinned a great sin, and Moses will intercede for them and ask for God to forgive them for atonement for their sin. And so Moses returns to the Lord and acknowledges the sin that has been committed, and he offers for himself to be written out of God's book. Blot me, I pray thee, out of thy book, if he won't be prepared to forgive the people. But the Lord says that you can't do that. Whoever has sinned against me, him will I blot out of my book. So there will be personal responsibility and accountability that Moses cannot take on that responsibility, that he can't be held to account for the personal sins of the others. And God tells him then to go and to lead the people into the land, to the place which I have spoken to you. And he tells him that an angel shall go before them. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit, I will visit their sin upon them. And then chapter 32 ended up with the Lord sending a plague upon the people because of the sin of the calf. We don't know any more details about that plague. Nothing further is said about it here at this point. Anyway, how many were affected or when it occurred. But we come in then to chapter 33, and the story really continues here. We see some of the after effects of what went on here. And we'll read chapter 33, verses 1 to 6 here to begin with. The Lord said to Moses, Depart, go up hence, you and the people whom I have brought up out of the land of Egypt, to the land which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, To your descendants I will give it. And I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go up among you, lest I consume you in the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. When the people heard these evil tidings, they mourned, and no man put on his ornaments, for the Lord had said to Moses, Say to the people of Israel, You are a stiff-necked people. If for a single moment I should go up among you, I would consume you. So now put off your ornaments from you, that I may know what to do with you. Therefore the people of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward. One of the important themes of the book of Exodus is the idea of the presence of God with his people. But now here the question is, how can God's presence remain with his people when they have sinned in this way and when they have turned away from him? So in verse 1 of chapter 33, God tells Moses to depart with the people, to leave Sinai, and to take them to the land that they have been promised, the promise that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to go to the land. And he repeats the promise of sending an angel before them in order to drive out the inhabitants of the land. The promise of the angel was given in chapter 32, verse 34 as well, and back in chapter 23, verses 20 and 21. 23, 20 and 21, where the Lord says, Behold, I send an angel before you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place which I have prepared. Give heed to him and hearken to his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. So this angel is sort of like God's representative, or has God's authority to lead the people. So God said, I'm not going to go with you, but I'll send this angel with you, and he will lead the people there and help in the conquest of the land. In verse 3, God says he won't go with them, lest I consume you in the way, for you are a stiff-necked people. And again, there's that description of them as being stiff-necked. So their sin has placed this distance between themselves and God. It's caused this separation in the relationship. And so really for their own protection and for their own survival, God says he will not go with them. if God is too close to them, then he would have to consume them with his wrath, that God cannot tolerate the presence of sin, and he would have to respond to that. So on hearing that God's presence would not be with them, we're told that the people mourned, and as a sign of their mourning, they removed from themselves their ornaments or jewelry, and then from Mount Horeb onwards, they stripped themselves of their ornaments. We come on then to chapter 33, verses 7 to 11, and this section here is really a little aside from the main story. It's sort of giving us some other sort of background detail here about what's going on. So verse 7 to 11 says this: Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose up, and every man stood at his tent door and looked after Moses until he had gone into the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the door of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. And when all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the door of the tent, all the people would rise up and worship, every man at his tent door. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses turned again into the camp, his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, did not depart from the tent. So although God has said that he will not go with the people to the land, he doesn't leave them completely or entirely. God has set this distance between himself and the people, and this is symbolized by Moses pitching this tent of meeting outside of the camp, so far off from the camp. The tent of meeting mentioned here is probably not the tabernacle, because the tabernacle has not yet been built. It's probably a simpler structure where Moses went to communicate with God before the building of the tabernacle. And when the tabernacle was built, the tabernacle was placed in the center of the camp, with the various tribes encamped around the tent there, the tabernacle there. So this seems to have been a different tent that was being used prior to the building of the tabernacle. So those who sought the Lord through prayer or sacrifice or praise would have to go outside of the camp to this tent of meeting. And when Moses went out to the tent, the people would all stand at the doors of their own tents, and they would watch him enter the tent of meeting. And when Moses had entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and would remain at the door of the tent, which would be a sign of God's presence. And then when the people saw this, they would worship. No doubt that would give them the assurance that God was there. God was there communicating with Moses, so it would give them that sort of confidence and assurance of the presence of God. And so in this way, God would be communicating with Moses, and we see the closeness of the fellowship between God, the Lord, and Moses here. We're told that the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. So it's sort of an intimate friendship relationship that's being described here. We see later in the book of Numbers, in chapter 12, verses 6 to 8, a story in which Moses' brother Aaron and his sister Miriam are challenging the authority of Moses and saying, well, we're just as important as you. God is communicating with us just as he is with you. But God responds to that in Numbers chapter 12 and verse 6. God calls the three of them together to give them a good talking to, really. And they were told that the pillar, they come to the tent of meeting, the three of them came, the Lord came down in the pillar of cloud, stood at the door of the tent, and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward, and he said, hear my words, if there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is entrusted with all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly, and not in dark speech, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? So the Lord is telling Aaron and Miriam there that he communicates with prophets through dreams and visions. But with Moses, it's different. He will communicate with him mouth to mouth or face to face. There's a difference in the manner of communication and the closeness of that relationship there. And then in Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 10, just after the death of Moses, a summary here of his life. The writer says, and has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. Again, indicating that special relationship that Moses had there with the Lord. So Moses would go to the tent, communicate with God, and the people would be at their own tents watching and seeing what was going on. And then when Moses left the tent, Joshua, we're told, remains at that tent of meeting. He did not depart from the tent, so perhaps in some way looking after it or ensuring that all was well there in that tent. So we pick up again the story here in chapter 33, verses 12 to 23. And again, it's the theme of God's presence that is continuing here. So verse 12 to 16 says this, Exodus 33, 12 to 16. Moses said to the Lord, see, thou sayest to me, bring up this people, but thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me. Yet thou hast said, I know you by name, and you have also found favour in my sight. Now therefore I pray thee, if I have found favour in thy sight, show me now thy ways, that I may know thee and find favour in thy sight. Consider too that this nation is thy people. And he said, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And he said to him, if thy presence will not go with me, do not carry us up from here, for how shall it be known that I have found favour in thy sight, I and thy people? Is it not in thy going with us, so that we are distinct, I and thy people, from all other people that are upon the face of the earth? God had said then that he would not go up amongst the people when they went to occupy the land. Rather, this angel would go. But Moses now seeks a guarantee from God that he will actually go with them. And in verses 12 and 13, Moses expresses these concerns to God. God has told Moses, Moses repeats this to the Lord, what the Lord has told him, bring up this people. You told me to do this, bring up this people. But Moses says that God has not let him know whom he will send to help him. Well, God has already said that he would send an angel. So why is Moses saying that you haven't told me who you're going to send? Perhaps he wants some further clarification of who this angel is, some identity for the angel, or perhaps he's thinking of some other human representative who would go up with him as well. Moses also reminds God that God has established this special relationship with him, that God had said to Moses, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight, that Moses has found favor in God's sight. So on the basis of this special relationship, then, Moses asks that God would show him his way so that he might know him and find favor in his sight. And then Moses also asks God to consider too that this nation is thy people, reminding him again, these are your people. And in response to Moses' appeal, then God answers in verse 14. He says, my presence, literally it would be translated, my face, my presence, my face will go with you. You there is singular. So he's talking to Moses directly. I will go with you, Moses, and I will give you rest. So Moses and Israel's rest in Canaan will be guaranteed by this promise of God's presence with them, with Moses. And Moses seeks a reaffirmation of this promise in verses 15 and 16. If God's presence will not be with Moses and the people, then Moses asks that God not carry them up from here. If you're not going to come with us, if your presence will not be with us, then let's just stay here. We don't want to go. We won't want to go if you're not going to come with us. And if Moses also reminds God here that in this way, with God's presence, this is why they are a distinct people, different from all the other nations around them. It's God's presence that makes them this distinct people. Reading on here in verses 17 to 23, it continues, and the Lord said to Moses, this very thing that you have spoken, I will do. For you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. Moses said, I pray thee, show me thy glory. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. But he said, you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live. And the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand upon the rock. And while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. So verse 17, God reassures Moses that he will do as Moses has asked, that this will demonstrate that he has found favor in the Lord's sight, that God promises that he will do this, he will go with them. He says, this very thing that you have spoken, I will do. For you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name. So again, on the basis of that special relationship that God has with Moses, he will do this. And Moses then takes this a step further, really, and he prays that God might show him his glory. He wants to see more. So this is a prayer to see God as he really is, something even more than Moses has already experienced. We're told in verse 11 that God spoke to him face to face. He already has that face-to-face communication with God. But Moses seems to want more than that. He wants to be shown the glory, the full glory of God. But this is really impossible. God says that he will make his goodness pass before Moses, and he will proclaim his name, the Lord or Yahweh, before him. But Moses will not be able to see God's face, to see God in the fullness of his glory, in all that he is. No person can ever experience that and live. And then God says, I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. Apostle Paul quotes those words in Romans chapter 9 and verse 15, where he's talking about the justice of God and the choices that God makes. And sometimes people might question the fairness or the justice of God. And God's response, well, in verse 14 of Romans chapter 9, Paul says, what shall we say then? Is there injustice on God's part? He's just been talking about God saying, Jacob I loved and Esau I hated. Is there injustice on God's part? He said, by no means, for he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. But Moses and Israel can really only marvel that God has chosen them as the objects of his grace and his mercy. And that choice cannot be explained in human terms. It cannot be that, well, they met certain qualifications or they passed the test, which allowed God to do that. And the phrase doesn't mean that God acts in an arbitrary or random way, just doing whatever he does, making whatever choices he thinks, but rather it draws attention to the fact that God's grace and mercy have been shown in certain situations without telling us the basis of that choice. So we don't know. We don't know why God chose Israel to be his people. So here God tells Moses that what he will do is he will put him in the cleft of a rock whilst the Lord passes by. And Moses will be covered with God's hand until he has passed by. And then when God takes away his hand, Moses will see the back of God, but he will not see his face. God is being described here with human characteristics and attributes. So it speaks of God having a face and having a hand and having a back. This is a type of language known as anthropomorphism. Human attributes or characteristics are attributed to other beings or objects, not that we're to literally understand that God has a hand and a back and a face as we do, but it's language to accommodate us so we understand what's going on. So Moses can see God then, would be able to see the back of God only when God has passed by. And in a way, that's often how we get to see God as well, when God has already passed by. That sometimes things happen and it's only afterwards that we look back and then we see, well, actually God was involved in that. So it's when he's passed by that we see God's involvement in things in our own lives as well. So Moses will see the back of God, but he cannot know God in the fullness of his glory. That would be something that would be beyond his comprehension. For a full revelation of what God is like, people must wait until the coming of Jesus Christ, that Jesus himself would be that fuller, that more complete revelation of God's glory. And the Gospel of John, in John chapter 1, John talks about the Word. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in verse 14, he says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. We have beheld his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father. We see the glory of the Father through the Word who became flesh. And in verse 18, John goes on to say, no one has ever seen God. The only Son who is in the bosom of the Father, he has made him known. It's in seeing the Son, seeing Jesus Christ, that we can see the Father. Later then in John chapter 6, verses 45 and 46, Jesus himself says this. He says, it is written in the prophets, and they shall all be taught by God. Everyone who has heard and learned from the Father comes to me, not that anyone has seen the Father, except him who is from God. He has seen the Father. So Jesus saying, the one who is from God, from the Father, he is the one who has seen the Father, referring to himself there. And then in John chapter 14, verses 8 to 11, we have Philip speaking to Jesus saying, Lord, show us the Father and we shall be satisfied. And Jesus replied, have I been with you so long and yet you do not know me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father and the Father in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father in me, or else believe me for the sake of the works themselves. So Moses was not allowed to see the fullness of the glory of the Lord, but through Jesus Christ, we can get a glimpse of the glory of the Lord as Jesus reflects that glory. We come into chapter 34, and we have here now the renewal or the restoration of the covenant that had been broken here. So we'll deal with this quickly here. Chapter 34, verses 1 to 4. Moses returns to the mountain now. He goes back to the mountain. The Lord said to Moses, "Cut 2 tables of stone like the first, and I will write upon the tables the words that were on the first tables which you broke. Be ready in the morning and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. No man shall come up with you, and let no man be seen throughout all the mountain. Let no flocks or herds feed before the mountain." So Moses cut 2 tables of stone like the first, and he rose early in the morning and went up on Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand 2 tables of stone. So he takes up the replacement stones that he'd broken the original ones at the foot of the mountain, and God instructs him to make 2 more, another set, and to take those up the mountain. No one else was allowed near the mountain, just Moses himself. And then God descends upon the mountain then to meet Moses in verse 5. And the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation. So this is a fulfillment of what God has promised earlier at the end of chapter 33, that Moses would be hidden in the cleft of the rock and the Lord would pass by. And this is what is happening here. And we see here the description of the character of God, that the name of the Lord is proclaimed, meaning that his character is being revealed. And he's described there as being merciful, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgressions and sin, but not forgetting what sin is, and not clearing the guilty, and the visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children. So the consequences of sin are still being suffered there. So Moses bows down and worships in verse 8 there. And then he says to the Lord in verse 9, "If now I have found favor in thy sight, O Lord, let the Lord, I pray thee, go in the midst of us, although it is a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for thy inheritance." So again, he's still concerned that God should go with them. And he's asking again, if I found favor in thy sight, go up in the midst of it, even though there are stiff-necked people. He again intercedes and asks God to pardon our iniquity and our sin and take us for thy inheritance. So he really wants to ensure that God is going to do that. And then verse 10 there, he said, "Behold, I make a covenant before all your people." This is God, the Lord speaking here. "Behold, I make a covenant before all your people. I will do marvels such as have not been wrought in all the earth or in any nation, and all the people among whom you are shall see the work of the Lord, for it is a terrible thing that I will do with you." So again, God is reinstituting this covenant and promising to do these marvelous things amongst them. Verse 11 and following verses there down to verse 16 emphasizes the importance of the obedience of this to this covenant. Observe what I command you this day. Behold, I will drive out before you the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Take heed to yourself, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, whither you go, lest it become a snare in the midst of you. You shall tear down their altars and break their pillars and cut down their Ashrim, for you shall worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and when they play the harlot after their gods and sacrifice to their gods, and one invites you, you eat of his sacrifice, and you take of their daughters for your sons, and their daughters play the harlot after their gods, and make your sons play the harlot after their God. So warning not to make any kind of covenant with the people of the land, whether a political covenant, a religious covenant, a social or a marriage covenant, not to get involved, not to associate with the people of the land. And the Lord declares himself as being a jealous God there. For the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God, that God will not tolerate any rivals. He demands that exclusive loyalty from his people. In verse 17 to 28, various laws are repeated there. And the first one in verse 17, you shall make for yourself no molten gods, which relates very closely back to what they just did in the making of that golden calf. That was the commandment that they had broken. So that's listed there. And then there's other laws there repeated concerning the festivals, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the dedication of the firstborn, the Sabbath, instructions concerning the Sabbath, and the other festivals of later referred to as Pentecost and the Feast of Tabernacles, those three major festivals that the people were to attend there. So those verse 27, the Lord says to Moses, write these words. In accordance with these words, I have made a covenant with you and with Israel. So the Lord instructing Moses to write these things down again. Verse 28 says he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. Again, same period that he was there the first time. He neither ate bread nor drank water, and he wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments. So this is a restoration or a renewal of that covenant that in effect had been broken by the people worshipping the golden calf. And then an interesting ending to the chapter, verse 29 to 35. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tables of the testimony in his hand, as he came down from the mountain, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. And when Aaron and all the people of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses talked with them. And afterward all the people of Israel came near, and he gave them in commandment all that the Lord had spoken with him in Mount Sinai. And when Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he took the veil off until he came out. And when he came out and told the people of Israel what he was commanded, the people of Israel saw the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face shone, and Moses would put the veil upon his face again until he went in to speak with him. So Moses came down from the mountain, and after being in the presence of God, his face was shining. He didn't know that. But this communion with God, being in the presence of God, has transformed Moses' appearance. And when he came down and the people and Aaron saw that, they were afraid. They were afraid to go near him. So Moses then spoke the commandments of God to the people. And then when he finished speaking, he veiled his face, covered his face. It seems then to have been a pattern of his behavior, that he removed the veil when he went in to speak with God, presumably in the tent of meeting subsequently, And when he spoke the words of God to the people, he would do so unveiled. And then he would put the veil back on again. Paul refers to this incident in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 12 to 18, and makes some interesting lessons from this. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 12. He's speaking in the passage here about the greatness of the new covenant compared to the old. The old covenant he describes as being the dispensation of death carved in letters on stone, which that came with splendor, he says. But then in verse 12, he says, since we have such a hope, the hope that we have under the new covenant, we are very bold, not like Moses, who put a veil over his face so that the Israelites might not see the end of the fading splendor. But their minds were hardened, for to this day, when they read the old covenant, that same veil remains unlifted, because only through Christ is it taken away. Yes, to this day, whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their minds. But when a man turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now the Lord is the Spirit. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being changed into his likeness from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. So Paul sees some important truths in this, that the veil of Moses there he sees as a symbol of the veiled glory of the old covenant. And the veil, he says, represents the veil that lies over the hearts of the Jewish people of Paul's own day there. Late in chapter 4, verse 3, Paul goes on to say, and even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled only to those who are perishing. In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of God, who is the glory of Christ, who is the likeness of God. So Paul sees this veil as symbolizing that hardness of heart that people have, that their minds are hardened, that they're veiled in that way. And he speaks here of this unveiled vision being given to the believer, that we with unveiled face behold the glory of the Lord, and we are being changed into his likeness from one degree of glory to another. So there's no barrier, there's no veil between us and us being changed into his likeness. And again, down in chapter 4, verse 5 and 6, he says, for what we preach is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, with ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For it is the God who said, let light shine out of darkness, who has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. So those old barriers like the veil, which prevented that glory from being seen, being removed because of what Christ has done.